All right, welcome back to another episode of Redeemer Unfiltered. Today, we're going to build off of last Sunday's sermon, where we're going to go a little bit deeper into and discover what the work is that God has put on our heart to do. And so another way of saying that is simply we want to help people discover their calling. And so I'm honored today to be joined by I would say a hero of my faith.
Thanks.
Jim Fickley. So Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, and that might help clarify why I asked you to be on this podcast with me.
Yeah. So Jim Fickley, I'm one of my biggest parts of my calling is father of four, and I've been married to my wife for 39 years, Karen. I have always enjoyed this idea of calling. So I started out in teaching school and coaching football, and then got a master's in counseling because I was pursuing the idea of what does God equip me to do and how can I best be utilized. Did that, worked in a large church for a number of years, and then in 2006 started Redeemer Community Church with John and Lindsay Fickley. And we kind of had the idea of really helping people. The reason why we started it was to really disciple people in who God was and what God was calling them to do. So 2006, at the same time, I started an executive coaching practice. And at this point, that's what I do primarily. So I work with individuals who are anywhere from, managers to CEOs, and they're asking the question, what's my purpose? And how can I utilize who I am to make the best career choices and kind of be in that in my lane?
Yeah.
So that's what I do.
I love it. Something I love about your story and kind of your influence is we have early 30-year-olds at Redeemer who you invested in 10, 15 years ago.
And we have 40 somethings. Yeah.
But then from like the young 30-year-olds who've done this that are now living into their calling, I've seen you work with, guys approaching 60 and beyond, that are high capacity leaders who are leveraging now kind of that next season of their life, post-retirement, for a greater purpose as well, where they're not just being successful or being significant. So no matter where you are, whether you're in college, a young adult, maybe even in retirement, like this is for you.
Right. Yeah. So, you should be asking the questions all along.
Yeah.
If you're a follower of Jesus.
Yeah. So, real quick, let me kind of get us up to date on where we were in Nehemiah. So in chapter 1, Nehemiah, his heart more or less aligns with God's heart. The city's destroyed and it needs to be rebuilt. And we see that his heart begins to break for what God's heart breaks for. And I asked the question, where does your heart break for God's purposes? And really try to get our people to lean into that for themselves, for thinking like, my heart might not break for everything that God's heart breaks for, but there's something specific. What is that thing? Mm-hmm. Then last week in chapter 2, he literally says that there was a work that God put in his heart to do.
Right, yeah.
And so I truly believe that every Christian, every follower of Christ, God has put a work in their heart to do for his kingdom. And so there's one work. We're going to find in chapter 4, there is the work. Right. So they're not going to their work. They're going to the work, which is God wants to advance his kingdom through the gospel of Jesus Christ. But in the work, we all have individual activities and individual things we're called to. And I want to help us discover those things. So we kind of did this really a 30,000 foot view of how to discover that. We said, if you had a Venn diagram of your strengths, your passions, God purposes, that really kind of that intersection of those three circles would be a place that you could discover your calling.
Right.
But it was so fast.
Oh yeah.
And I thought we've got to bring this. So if we're at 30,000, 50,000 feet in an airplane, maybe we can come down to like a helicopter cruising over town right now. So not fully on the ground. That'll probably require being a part of a cohort or working with a coach or a small group. But if we're not doing that, can we at least get closer to the ground? So I'd love to get a little closer.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So
real quick on that, when you were talking about the, he had a work for them to do. I was at an event this past weekend, and I looked at this chapel, and the chapel was very intricate, and it was very ornate, but in kind of like a modern version of that.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about the architect that put that all together, and how detailed it was, even 40 feet in the air. And I thought, if an architect is that purposeful, just imagine how more purposeful God is, and how he has a purpose and an intent for the things that he creates.
Oh, well, that's a great illustration. Even just looking around this room.
Oh yeah.
It's like,
There's intent.
Yeah.
There's intent all along. And so why wouldn't we consider that God has an intent for our life?
yeah, love it. Well, let's kind of, like I said, if we're just looking at an outline, so, there's a difference between the menu and the recipe. So we're just looking at a menu and kind of getting the picture of what it is. Like, what would be some of the pieces that you'd want to work with someone through? Like, I'm not saying like go in detail on them, just kind of the talking points that you'd want to hit if you're walking with someone to help them to discover their calling.
Yeah. I would think I would want somebody to consider their experiences and what those experiences are telling them about how they've lived their life or what they've leaned into over their life, their experiences are. I would want them to understand how they're wired. And that typically is around the idea of talents, gifts, strengths.
Yeah.
I want them to understand their values. Those are the kind of like the behaviors that you do on a regular basis that you can observe and identify and name.
Yeah.
That we all behave in a certain way. You're the Martin family behaves a lot different than the Fickley family because you have some core values.
Yeah.
Then I would want people to kind of create a plan and kind of ask the question, well, how could this all be applied? And then start thinking, well, what is it that I'm looking at, and how does this what makes sense putting it all together?
Yeah. Great. Well, I've put together kind of my own talking points just for the sake of the podcast. So not an exhaustive list, not a perfect list, but at least it gets the airplane down.
Right. Yeah.
So first is I'd love to just define calling. If someone was saying like, hey, how would you define what your calling is? Jim, how would you define calling?
Yeah. So there's a lot of books that have been written. One of the best books that have been written on this is by a guy named Os Guinness, on a Christian's calling.
Yeah.
It's called, it's a weighty book. It's called The Call. And he also has a smaller book.
Hardback.
Yeah. And then also a smaller version of it. And I took a lot of what he says and then I kind of did my own.
I just read it. That's a great definition.
Yeah. A calling is God's personal summons to me to invest my whole life for his kingdom agenda, then to leverage my unique talents, experiences, and gifts to accomplish his specific purposes. And in that, there's two purposes. There's God's primary call in our life, like he says, follow me. And then he tells Peter, and here, let me tell you what we're going to do. We're going to make fishers of men.
Yeah.
So calls, and here's a specific purpose. Here's why I'm calling you, because we're going to go make fishers of men.
I love that. That's, think about with identity, we kind of have a primary identity and sub-identities. Mm-hmm. And so a primary identity is that we are children of God, beloved children of God. Yeah. But then, a sub-identity to that, it's not the main definer, like I'm a husband. Mm-hmm. I'm a dad.
Right.
I'm a friend. And then there's things, I'm a pastor. There's things and that shapes the way that I behave as a child of God, or being a child of God shapes the way that I behave in those areas. And I think the same thing with calling. Your primary calling, man, my whole life on his agenda.
Right.
And that's true of all Christians.
Right.
But then there's that personal call, where you're taking your talents, your gifts, your experiences, and using them for his specific purposes.
And leveraging them for his specific purposes.
Yeah, I love that framework. So something we were talking earlier, you said, a calling assumes a caller. Yeah. Anything else you want to explore on that? I thought that was.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have to kind of come to this conversation with the idea that there is a caller. It's not some kind of a cosmic kind of mystical thing.
Yeah.
But there's a caller, and the word vocation is the same word that we use as call. The call, vocation, and it really doesn't mean anything more than in Scripture to call.
Yeah.
To call. And you see it, God calls, and what it is, it's just a speaking into or a calling out. Jesus said it to Peter, come follow me. Animals have a certain call in the woods. The phone rings, there's a certain tone that you kind of pick up, and there's a caller.
Yeah.
And then there's a callee. So it's not like really mystical, but you really, when you think about the intentionality and purpose, you kind of start with God. God's the caller, and then we're the we're the people that are answering the phone, however you want to do that.
Yeah. And so what I want to do kind of for the rest of our time is someone said, okay, like, I believe there's a caller.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he's calling. How do I hear it?
That's right.
And so I think what we're going to talk about now is kind of help us to now help to kind of clarify that, where it's not just fuzzy noise, where it's like, oh, like I feel like there's some clarity here.
Right. Yeah,
So one of the first things I like to work with people when I do discipleship groups with guys, I'll oftentimes tell them, like, hey, let's just start off before we jump into studying the Bible, before we ever work through practicing spiritual disciplines, before we kind of have our checklist of material we're going through. I'm like, I just love to hear your story.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think our stories are one of the best things God has given us to help people to know and experience his love. Like, I love that's why I love the woman at the well.
Mm-hmm.
It's like by her testimony, all these people are getting saved.
Right.
I think there's something really unique about the John the Baptist, where it says that, he came to give testimony to Jesus. And the way that that's placed seems like a really significant thing about his witness and his testimony. So when someone goes, well, I don't know how to tell my story, I think there's some helpful frameworks we can give.
Right. Yeah.
And so one way that I've done this is I've done a practice where you take a piece of paper and you give someone 10 minutes and you say, hey, draw some key pictures in 10 minutes that help you give an outline of your story, and then we're going to share them. And it just forces you to kind of really quickly. So for me, like, I had an airplane on the first picture, and I said, I grew up an Air Force kid, and so we moved around a lot, and that's significant to my story. And then the next picture was a bed with a rug, and I was like, I remember in 1992 kneeling beside my bed and giving my life to Christ. And that was then the next picture was a basketball, kind of that. So much of my identity in my childhood and even my teenage years was I'm a basketball player, and then what happens when God ripped that from me?
Right. Yeah.
There's two masks, just talking about, like, who I act like I am versus who I really am. So there's so I kind of paint, so you can do that. That's an exercise to kind of figure out your story or to tell it. There's a church out of Dallas, I think Dallas, called Watermark. And they have a really helpful just worksheet, and they walk through 5 things. And I've ripped this off and shared it with others, but I
was on the Watermark website yesterday.
Yeah.
And I saw Heritage Heroes, and I thought, oh, that's where Jeff ripped this off from.
Yeah. Most good things I say are from others.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Every now and again, something I have.
Sorry.
You're getting a little phone call there.
Sorry about that.
And so, so the kind of the 5 categories they work through are, your heritage. And so that you can go shallow, deep. Shallow is, my dad was an Air Force guy, and we grew around moving up. A little deeper is, my family comes from Appalachia. And there's this kind of, always the underdog, no one believes in you mentality, and we're going to prove them right. But then you kind of go to heroes. So who are the people that really have shaped your faith journey? So that when there's some kind of pillars of your faith, high points, just the best times in life, where you're really riding high, hard times, blowing out a knee or struggling with mental health, and then hand of God, kind of like, how is all this stuff tied together? How has God used all this stuff to shape you? And all of a sudden you start to see, like, man, these experiences, for instance, I have low level dyslexia. As a kid, that really made me feel dumb. I was behind in school. I had to read with my finger, and people would make fun of me. And,
right.
And so that's an experience.
It was a mark for sure.
But then what happened is, because of my eyes not doing well, I had to become really good at memorizing things. And so then all of a sudden that shaped me to have a better memory. And so all of a sudden it's like, man, like God, so the hand of God, he took a disability and then created it as a strength. So I think you can just kind of piece that together. So then so now we have these 5 categories. Hey, here's how you can work through those to kind of now tell your story. I've even had someone walk me through a life map. I kind of, on a piece of paper, I start off, 1984, I was born. And then it's like, here's a high point, gave my life to Christ. Here's a low point, I got arrested. Here's just a kind of a season of good. Here's a high point when God called me to ministry. So, and then I can look at my life on a map and kind of see the highs and lows.
Yeah.
But so that's how I work with people.
Right. Yeah.
Like I said, everything that I just said is stolen from others.
Sure.
But if someone was asking you, Jim, like, how do I craft my story? Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah. So I would just pick up on, I thought the heritage, when you did that in church a couple of weeks ago, and then seeing it yesterday on Watermark in the context that I was looking at it, really makes sense. It kind of gives you a framework. I use the one on the map, start on the left side and go to the right side. That you and just build your, what are the highs? And what I try and do is I try and create detail in it, like you were talking about the plane, but then the nuance of the plane or whatever. And it's interesting. You and we're talking what you experienced at Watermark, or you kind of picked up from somewhere else. I saw this. There's one of the most successful classes at Harvard Business School is run by a guy named Bill George, and he does it's called Authentic Leadership track. And he starts that very place. He starts down the left-hand corner and goes to the, do your map, do your life map, tell your story. And in that case, what are the leadership moments? But in our case, what are the moments of life where you had ups and downs? And so you're looking for it, when you put it all together, you're looking for themes, drivers, motivators, things where you said yes to certain things and no to certain things. Our brains are fully formed when we're kids. They're shaped. They have potential to grow, but only in certain areas that we start saying yes to. So the things that we say no to, that atrophies, or just kind of dies away. But the things that light up more turn into the particular strengths. And so you can see it over your in your story.
That's cool. As you're saying that, I was thinking about, like, what are some of those kind of forks in the road moments,
right?
And I'm sure there's plenty before this, but I was like, going to college,
right?
Like I had given my life to ministry. Do I go to the Bible college and get a Bible degree, or do I go to a state school,
right,
and get a secular degree? It's like some type of, what was the motivating structure or the driver behind the choice I made, or work, like taking a job or asking Lucy to marry me. Like, I think it's really interesting. Like, so you see these points, but then kind of getting a level deeper, saying like, what was the driver behind that decision?
Right. Yeah. What are the drivers?
Yeah.
I would call those life gates.
Okay.
When you go through the gate and something was different, when you get married, you were here and now you're here, it's significantly different.
Yeah.
And if you would have married somebody in that gate, it could have gone different. Like, but you married Lucy, and so those are life gates in our life where things were a certain way, and they become what they're now are as we reflect on them.
So let's say someone does the work, whatever method they use, but they put together their story, and they can now see it in front of them. Like, man, this is the journey that God has taken me on, and I'm seeing how He's at work. What are some questions?
Can I add one more thing to that?
Yeah. You
can be as creative with that as you want to too.
Yeah.
I have some people that are, just kind of give me a line. Sometimes our brains respond to, and the reason why I use pictures is because our brains are creative. We become like childlike when we use pictures. Some people, I had this one guy, you could use a sheet of paper or you can use a 2x3 board.
Yeah.
And I told this CEO of a company, like, hey, you could do it this way or this way. He came in with this long thing and he really got into it, and it kind of told his story, and it was really important to him to kind of look at the details and kind of like see and really kind of understand.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think about, I've had guys use stick figures.
Yeah.
And they're like, this is all I got.
Got it. Right.
And I got 3 pictures, and 2 of them are stick figures.
Right.
And I've had, I've seen other people like, Bill Jolly here at Redeemer. His story is beautiful. I mean, he's got like a Volkswagen van, and it's like all the, just the guitars, but his pictures it's almost like a collage that fits together perfectly. And just I'm like, that's next level. Yeah. It doesn't matter wherever you are. Yeah. Be as creative as you want.
And it gets to the point of how we're made. Some people will just prefer just stick figures. Other people will light up if they add more to it.
Yeah.
So be who you are when you're doing it.
So once you have that, what are some questions, that you would say, like, hey, now ask some of these questions, kind of take your story to a deeper level. We already mentioned a couple of them. I'd love to kind of.
Yeah. I mean, the themes, motivators and drivers. What are the motivators and drivers? And be specific with it. What are the key themes? And typically I ask people to kind of say, what are the 5 to 7 themes, not 15. But just kind of narrow it down, because you can, if you go just the extra level, you can kind of start pairing things together.
Yeah.
And put words to it. I was
watching a documentary on a personality test, and it talks about how this, I don't know how truthful this is, but it said, like, the type A, type B stuff was really developed by big tobacco. And but they kind of spurred, like, it's like, we're not sure how accurate type A, type B. But they said what they did is,
in terms of personality.
yeah,
A, B.
But they said what they did is as researchers and sociologists, they started looking at just like, what are all the descriptors of personality traits in the dictionary? And they had hundreds. And they said, okay, now start categorizing these.
Well,
and they eventually got it down to like 5 primary categories, and so, but I think like the same way as you're thinking about those themes, you might have 30 on a paper, but as you do the extra work, it's like, well, maybe this and this actually fit together and we can better summarize it.
Yeah.
So,
So what are those, what have you been good at all along? I think the life gates are important because you made a decision for some reason. You were talking about it, why did you do that certain thing? Analyze that. And there's another aspect to it called motivated abilities. When you start, this jumps into strengths, but what are the things that you were really good at, and at the same time you really loved?
Yeah.
So when you put those two together, that becomes a strength in your life.
Yeah.
What are the things that you really love, really good at, and that you really loved? Because there's some things that we really love, and we're really not good at it. I mean, that's what American Idol has kind of shown us. There's people that really love singing, and then they get in front of Simon Cowell and say, "No, you're really not good at that, by the way." So you can analyze that story by looking at the motivated abilities too.
Yeah. That's why I'm a pastor, not a musician.
All right.
We'll talk more about that later. Right. All right. So once you kind of have your story, that's definitely a piece of the puzzle. It's going to help then shape the next things we're going to talk about. So strengths.
Sure.
Everyone has strengths they bring to the table. And I would say this is the stuff you're good at, the stuff you're able to do. And so if we had a Venn diagram,
can I add nuance to that?
Yeah.
A strength is considered what are the consistent ways of thinking, feeling, behaving that are productively applied.
Say it one more time.
Your consistent ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving.
Okay.
That you can leverage or you can productively apply them in life.
Great. So if the Venn diagram started with, if we're taking Sunday's sermon and trying to bring it down, so one of those circles was your strengths.
Yeah. What are you good at?
What are you good at? How would you help someone how can someone discover that? Is that just I think I'm good at this, or is there something deeper to that? Is there other tools for getting at it?
So, strengths leave clues, don't they? You can have, look back, and that's what looking at your experience or your life map, that reveals. I was good at this. And I really enjoyed. Then you could, that's just kind of like observing. You could have friends speak into it. What are you, I have one exercise I did with the person one time, text or email 5 friends and ask them to kind of do a narrative 5 bullets on what your strengths are.
Yeah.
So your friends could provide you with a observation on that. You can take the Strength Finder, which is typically the ones that I use. When we started Redeemer, we took 90 people through the Strength Finder just to kind of give them a perspective on how God made them. There's another free version, it's called VIA Strengths, capital V, capital I, capital A Strengths. It's put out by the University of Penn.
Okay. I think it's funny. Like there's things that some of you said, your friends, like someone's like, "Hey Jeff, you're really good at," And when you hear that from multiple people, even if you don't believe it, you're like, maybe I'm good at this.
Right.
And so I think there's that value of someone speaking into it. They can maybe see something in you that you might not even see in yourself.
It's huge.
I'd never done, is it Strengths Finder or Strength Finder?
Strengths.
Okay, so
Finder.
You put me through that when I was interviewing here.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's funny is throughout most of my adult life, people said, Jeff, you're really good at teaching. And for instance, when I was in college, even I found I learned best by studying something as if I was going to teach it to others. And so my friends that would skip all semester and then show up for the one test, I would teach them during an all-nighter how to do this stuff.
Oh, cool.
And I knew if I could teach it to them, I knew I could test well on it. And so man, you're really good at teaching.
Right.
But then I took strength, and teaching wasn't on my list.
It wasn't on there. It's not,
but there's other things that it provided language for me that really helped me make sense of who I am. Mm-hmm. One of my strengths was achiever. And so at the paid level, it kind of gives you a description of that. And it talks about how, even on a day off, you can't fully rest until you've completed a task.
Mm-hmm.
And it all of a sudden made sense to me. I was like, that's why on Fridays I have to mow my yard.
Right. Yeah.
Like there's something about, something like, hey, I mow the yard. And on a Friday, I really don't feel like I'm ever resting on my day off until I've
accomplished something.
I got the bed made. I cleaned the house. I mowed the yard, something. And I was like, oh, this is because I'm wired that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then responsibility was another one of mine. And so then all of a sudden I was like, man, like that's how I'm wired, but maybe it's not fair for me to superimpose that on someone else.
Right.
And so but it really, what I loved about that is it really helped me kind of discover who God created me to be and provided some language that all of a sudden a lot of who I am began to make sense. I was like, this is really good.
Sure.
So, so if you never had a chance to go through that with someone, I think it's a helpful tool. It was a really helpful tool.
Yeah. So the other aspect of that is when you talk about those particular strains, you could be an achiever or a responsible person, a operator for a Chick-fil-A. And when I said my definition of a strength, the goal is to take, consistent ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving, and then productively apply it to a certain thing.
Yeah.
So you're productively applying responsibility and what was the other one? And achieving, yeah,
believe,
like accomplishing, kind of putting all those things together. So when you create a message for Sunday morning, you're using the particular strains.
Yeah.
Or when you're achieving and taking responsibility for being a homeowner and cutting the grass, you're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So you productively apply it to a particular area.
Yeah.
And so that's how it becomes a strength.
Yeah.
And the more you do it, then it becomes more strengthened in you.
So I want to kind of take this and turn it a little bit. As a staff team, you had taken us all through this strengths finder.
Uh-huh.
And so we all kind of knew. And then you showed us now you took another angle to it. You said, there's actually 4 primary themes, and this is how so-and-so fits in this theme. And you kind of showed how this actually, we're a well-balanced team. If we were all on this one theme, like an executor, what were the 4? Do you remember the 4 themes on top of your head?
Execution, influencing, strategic.
Yeah, something else.
And relationship building.
Yeah. So if we were just all relationship, we wouldn't be a great team. If we were just all strategic and great at whiteboards, we wouldn't. But it's really and so in the same way, like we all have these themes that really, when we come together, we become a more powerful unit. And so I think in the same way, that's kind of how the body of Christ works,
mm-hmm.
where God gives us all different spiritual gifts, and it's really good that we're not all feet. It's really good that we're not all eyes. And someone gets to be like, the armpit. Like, I don't know who that is.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
But it's important. You got to get some of that stuff out.
They should own it. They really are.
So, so I think a lot of times, strengths, there are some just practical things that you might say are more secular definitions of that. And there's also a spiritual side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the line between the two, like you said, is kind of fuzzy.
Right.
But I would say that your spiritual gifts would also factor into or play into your strengths.
Right.
If someone to know their spiritual strengths, any guidance on how to discover those?
Yeah, I look at it the same and very similar. There's not like you said, where's the line on it?
Yeah.
And Paul wasn't being exhaustive when he was kind of creating his list. Like First Corinthians 12,
Romans
1
12.
Peter 4, Romans 12, Ephesians 4. He wasn't being exhaustive. He was saying, here's a demonstration, illustration of what how the body works. So there's in Romans 12 leadership and service. So when you do that, Paul's looking at the coin like this, and right after Jesus's death, he's looking at the coin and creating the church, and he's saying, there is particular wiring in this whole organization, and you all aren't the same way, and you shouldn't assume that you are, and you should leverage everybody's particular strengths. And I would say that if you flip the coin around, secular organizations like Gallup are saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Like the best teams are the ones that have a collection of influencing, strategic, relationship building, and strategic.
Yeah.
So it's the same kind of look at it, but just from a different lens. So when you think of it from a spiritual point of view or through a spiritual, it's important to have the scripture inform you. So look at those lists as well, and ask your friends, hey, do I have the gift of leadership? do I have the gift of, service, or, or have them speak into your life as well.
Yeah. So you can look at those lists and realize that none of them are comprehensive or exhaustive. But they at least can start providing some language for something that they could be. I always, not always, but I remember I was taught that these lists were given as Paul's looking at an actual particular church. He's looking at the church in Corinth, and he's saying the goal is for this church to be built up and to be strengthened. Mm-hmm. And he's looking at them saying, what are the needs that this church has to be built up? And then now he's speaking into the strengths that these people have for the purpose of building that church up. Same thing with the church in Rome, the church in Ephesus. So it's really him looking and assessing and saying, hey, here are the gifts that God's given to this church that you guys need for building it up. But and therefore it's not an exhaustive list, but it's particular to that church.
In context,
but I think it does help provide language. I remember in high school, I went through like a spiritual gifts assessment test. Mm-hmm. Any like, how do you feel about this?
So spiritual gifts assessments are put together by people, and they're trying to kind of start I would say they're trying to start the conversation.
Yeah.
But you always need to test it in a community, and also be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
Like I remember in the 1980s, when I took one, I came up administrative, and Karen came up something or other, but she should have, I'm not sure if our test switched, because she's definitely the administrative one, and I don't have that particular wiring. So I probably was trying to be that person.
Yeah.
Kind of like, whereas the Strength Finder or other assessments that are built on, they've been normed and kind of researched and developed out of, and they're very valid and reliable. They provide you with it. You can't fake it out.
So I'll say spiritual gift assessment can be a helpful tool
to start the conversation.
Get the conversation going, but it's not the gospel.
No, right.
It's not an absolute thing. It could be wrong. It's fallible as well.
And, and with any one of these, and I would really say this with the point of this is to help you understand yourself, to become aware, so that you can use it for God's glory, and for the glory of building up the church and influencing and changing the world around you.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we take spiritual inventories or Strength Finder, whatever. You could look at it and go, and without a humble heart, you could start saying, like even in like a leader, like if you did the spiritual, you could test for leadership and go, I'm a leader, So there's pride built into if you want to shine it up and say, this is me, and for the glory of me. That's not the point.
Yeah.
The point is to stay humble and just be used.
Yeah. Good deal. So, so then the next thing is kind of like the next part of the Venn diagram would be passions. And so we talked about just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're passionate about it.
Right.
Just because you're passionate about it doesn't mean you're good at it.
Right.
And so, when I was in college, I was really good at math, even good at Excel sheets. Mm-hmm. I'm not passionate about accounting.
You don't like that.
I took managerial accounting and financial accounting, and nothing about that made me think I'm going to go work for one of the big firms in the cities on accounting. But then also I used to love playing music. Mm-hmm. So, I remember 1996, picked up a guitar, learned to play it. In college, I began to write songs and played small coffee shops. Like I was passionate about it, but there's a difference between the person that like a group of friends enjoys listening to and what Nashville will accept.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So I wasn't really necessarily good at it.
Right.
Passionate, but not, maybe
that's
not
the difference, isn't
maybe
it?
okay, but not great. And so with that, like,
that's the motivated abilities I was talking about.
Yeah.
What you're really good at, and when you're really good at and you really love doing, that's the terminology.
Yeah. So then how do we discover our passions? If someone's like, what am I passionate about? That might seem really easy for some people. You're like, well, I love food, but if someone's struggling to say like, what am I passionate about? How would you help them? Any questions they could start to ask to kind of get at it?
What do you enjoy? And be honest with yourself. What matters most to you? What people, events, experiences light you up?
Yeah.
Where do you and your friends find commonality and affinity?
Yeah.
So those kind of things, and the idea of all of this, and I would, where humility is a piece of it. Curiosity is also a piece of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Always be asking and be curious as to, and lean into things and ask, well, why did I do that? Why did I like that? Or
Yeah.
so just being aware, or having an aware, a heart that's aware, is helpful.
That's good. And so now if we're going to kind of keep working this Venn diagram, we've got a circle of gifts. We've got a circle of passions, and that's kind of now intersecting. If we bring in a third circle to that, it'd be God's purposes.
Right.
And so there's a guy named Frederick Buechner.
Uh-huh.
I'm not German. Fickley.
Fickley is German.
Strong German.
I get that right every time.
But he says, the place God calls you is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meets. And I think that's kind of like your deep gladness is really that gifting and passions. Mm-hmm. And I would say that the world's deep hunger was really that's God's heart, God's purposes. And so, how like if someone says like, well, how do I know God's purposes? And so outside of saying, oh, we'll just read the Bible. Is there any kind of framework that people could work through on discovering? So God's heart, God's purposes.
There's when you think about the different aspects of or the spheres that we live in a circle of me and God. We live in like another circle or definition or another let's talk about not in terms of spheres, but talk about in terms of relationships.
Yeah,
I have a relationship with God and myself, and I have a next one out would be I have a relationship with myself. Because I have to understand myself. I live in this body. I have desires, strengths, whatever, all that kind of stuff. And I want to be mentally dialed in. I don't want to have depression. Want to be paying attention to that. We also have the relationship with others. That means the people that we're around or the concerns of what's going on socially in the world.
Yeah.
And then there's also nature. The things God says, hey, tend to my creation. I'm putting you on earth to tend to my creation.
Yeah.
So there's the 4 areas. So any one of those are God's heart. God has a heart for instance, you're a pastor, you have a really strong abiding relationship. I mean, we all hopefully are striving for it, but you're focusing on that sphere and kind of like helping people understand God.
Yeah.
There's some people that might be psychologists or sociologists or anthropologists who are kind of saying, I really want people to have mental health and I want people to thrive. That's my area.
Yeah.
There's other people. And then so this, so you have to kind of be thinking in those terms.
There's an exercise that you've put people through before that I've got the benefit of participating in where you'll just ask some questions. You're like, well, hey, when did God become more than a name to you? And then you'll talk about like, what are you good at? I think one of the questions was like, when's the time you just stood in awe of God's creation? But you kind of use those questions. Mm-hmm. There's a 4th one in there I'm missing, but just kind of say, like, oh, these are our 4 primary relationships.
Right.
Relationship with God, self. Yeah. I think it was like, who is someone influential in your life or something.
Right.
But really to show that we all resonate with these relationships. And you see it in Genesis 3. There's shalom, there's this peace, this wholeness, everything's right. It was good.
Yeah.
And then it's fractured.
Right.
And after the fall, one is now all of a sudden Adam is separated from God. So that relationship with God is broken. He's making fig leaves to cover himself because he's feeling shame. And that shame is a broken relationship with himself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Him and Eve are pointing the finger at each other. Like she's
the one.
Yeah. And all of a sudden there's a broken relationship with others. And then all of a sudden, like, hey, you're going to work the land, but the thorns are going to get you. It's like creation. And so all of a sudden you see there's fracturing. And so God's heart is really to bring restoration to those things. And so if you're like, man, what's God's purposes? What's God's heart? I think about Jesus, the 3 things that he came to do. If you read the Gospels, it'll say Jesus came to, he came to seek and save the lost. Right. You look at the lost coin, the lost sheep, the prodigal son. Mm-hmm. It says that in Mark 10 that Jesus didn't come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. And so he came to serve. And then we also see the kind of the kicker is like he came eating and drinking. It's like, but man, is that not something important in relationships?
Right. Yeah.
And so I think seeking and saving the lost shows God's heart for our relationship with him. He wants us to be in right relationship with him.
Yeah.
When I think about Jesus's own teachings, when he talks about the Sermon on the Mount extremely practical. It's like, hey, you've heard it said, don't murder. Don't even be angry. Because like that's that sinful anger.
Right,
He talks about, hey, don't be anxious. Look at the birds.
Yeah.
Look at the lilies of the field. So I think like you can even build a case for like he cares about your emotional and mental health.
Right. Yeah.
Like anger issues, anxiety issues, fear. We see that table and him meeting with people, like he calls us to be ministers of reconciliation. Mm-hmm. So this idea of like, hey, we want to restore community. And then at the end of the day, like he has a deep care for the creation that God's put us in,
mm-hmm.
And so I think you could say like, God's heart is to really restore. So I love that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I just got out of a coaching appointment with a woman upstairs who is, her assignment was kind of, what are the things that really are you most excited, the problems you're most excited to learn about and solve?
Yeah.
And she said housing and nature. And she said, I have a passion for nature because I hike all the time.
Yeah.
And I wish more people did so they could see what could be and what tends to like the brokenness of it.
Yeah.
And that people need housing because everything else kind of pivots off of it, their well-being, their sense of self, their all those things. And so she has a real passion.
Yeah.
Yeah. To your point.
And I said, once again, like if you're like, was that biblical? Man, Jesus cares about our basic needs, mm-hmm. about where we'll live. Look at the birds there. They don't sow or reap or store away in barns. Your heavenly Father, takes care of them. They've got shelter.
Right, yeah.
He talks about like, don't worry about what you eat, what you drink, what you wear. And like, but what we see is like, his desire is for those things to be provided, that everyone should have their basic needs met.
Sure.
And so you can build a case like that.
Sure. And then even back to your Nehemiah, we're talking about Nehemiah. He had a heart for having a community, a city that could sustain people. They would build a culture.
Yeah. I love it in Jeremiah 29. It's this idea of seeking the welfare where God has placed you. And it's like, man, plant gardens, mm-hmm. get married,
that's right.
Raise kids. Yeah. So God's heart is for his people to be invested mm-hmm. in their communities, not to create holy huddles and to hide,
right.
But he wants us to be invested in so yeah, you could really, you can just go deeper and deeper and deeper, but it's a journey of discovering. It's a lifelong journey of discovering more of God's heart.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, we could, like an illustration of, we had it in the worship guide a couple of weeks ago. Michael Mabry wants to attack health in Tennessee, and that's he's trained. He has a skill set. He has particular strengths. He has a passion for it, and also we could say it's God's purpose for people to be healthy.
So, great. Well, the analogy of landing a plane. Or landing the helicopter. Or landing the helicopter doesn't work because I said we're not going to get to the ground. Uh-huh. So if we began, if we got moving down, what are some just practical things? If people said like, "Hey, I want to discover my calling. I want to find that place where I can be like, man, this is the work God has put in my heart to do." What are some practical things people can do from here?
Yeah, so you could do. I would think of it in terms of all the different aspects that we talked about. I would say, look at your experiences, do the life map.
Yeah. So take time to know your story.
To know your story, to nuance it, to kind of go down, do the drawing, put pictures to it, and then and analyze it by asking, what are the themes, the drivers, what are the things the motivated abilities, and do that.
Yeah.
You could even turn that around and share that with a friend and say, hey, can I tell you my story? What do you see in me? And just wanted to kind of get your perspective on it. Then you could take a strength finder. You could take the VIA strengths. You could send an email. I don't know if you were on that list. Scott Caldwell about a year ago sent an email to a bunch of us and said, can you give me, 5 things that you think are strengths in my life? Yeah. And I think there was 10 people on the list, and
I didn't make the cut. Now I'm having fear of missing out.
Sorry. We'll send it to you now. I'll have them send it to you. And just ask. So you could do that very practical, friendship based, or you could take the strength finder, or you could ask the conversation in terms of spiritual gifts, or then really kind of drill that all down. Like, what is based on all of these couple of things, what are my values? What are my consistent ways? Values really are, you might be in an organization that talks about values, mission, vision, and values. Values are, I always put equals behind. Values equals behavior. So values would be like, what are the ways that you behave on a regular basis, and that you want to live your life around? So those are the things, and then start read scripture, listen to the message, asking friends, be inspired by other people who are doing cultural things, trying to invest in the world.
Yeah.
Lean in, ask God, where can I, based on all of this, where can I roll up my sleeves and get involved in God's kingdom work?
That's good. Yeah. I think, as you're sharing that, I'm sure Nehemiah, his heart broke. Then he spent about 4 months praying, fasting, seeking God's heart, making sure that he was seeking God's will above his own. And so I'd say, as you kind of begin to do the work and start having some clarity around these things, prayerfully bring them to God, and don't expect that, like, hey, you're going to have an answer day one.
No,
it could be, it could be a lifelong journey of seasonal callings even, but it's not just don't put pressure, like, have got to find but I would say, don't feel pressure to find your calling now, but do be expectant, that you will discover something that you're like, man, this is where my heart beats with God's heart, and I'm all of a sudden living into this thing.
Yeah. So another thing that I would tell people in your 20s, really your job is just to prune, to get as many experiences, and as you're pruning, like, do I like this? I like aspects of it, but I don't like all of it.
Yeah.
Just get more experience and say no, and just continue to prune. Also, that's in the same vein as kicking the tires. Just try different things. Try and do it. And then ask friends, kick the tires, do it in community.
Yeah.
I was talking about the woman upstairs. She is in now the process of networking with people to ask questions. Who's doing this the best that I can kind of either be mentored by, or I can get more information, or whatever.
You don't have to reinvent the wheel or invent the wheel.
No, right. You don't have to come up and say, this is what I'm going to do. There's other people that are doing, and now we can research anything.
Yeah.
So
I love some of the best advice I think I ever heard for someone in their 20s came from a pastor in Atlanta. And he said, he was talking about the story of Joseph, because Joseph didn't really get to the right hand of Pharaoh until he was 30. And so if you're looking at his story, like, is he drawing up on his 5-year plan? I would like to be thrown into a well and sold into slavery. I'd really love to be accused of something I didn't do.
His life map like this.
But his point is he's like, just because the job you're in or where you're at in life isn't necessarily like what you want to do, or like, is this really what I'm passionate for? He said, be faithful where you are, because faithfulness in present circumstances prepares you for future opportunities. And so I think I love that idea of, like, man, be faithful where you are. God's shaping you. Your story is not by accident. The highs, the lows, everything that's the experiences are then preparing you. Then when opportunity rises and you have this kind of idea of, like, man, this is where my heart beats, and I know this is aligned with God's will, and now there's an opportunity.
Right.
Man, it's almost like I don't know if you ever like do an arcade. I've never played an arcade race game, but I've seen them.
Right.
And like where my son Whit will be doing one, and they'll have these like boosters, and you hit it and it shoots the car faster to help you make your time. Yeah. It's like sometimes when you find those opportunities, it's almost like you hit one of those boosters. It's like a supercharger, and you have a season of just like, man, I'm really living into this. And those are beautiful things to be a part of.
Yeah.
So
let me add 2 more things.
Yeah.
At the end of that, I would, a lot of people like this. I do and have done it. Create a mission statement for yourself.
Okay.
Put words, say, Lord, what does all this mean? Kind of as it drips down, does it kind of like it's all being funneled down into something? What is the statement? What is the statement? For me, it's I coach people and I write music to enhance people's lives. It doesn't have to be long. It's just a motto that I know that this is what I'm on earth for. So that's one thing, do that. It could be a paragraph if you want to, but that a motto is something that you can linger on. Like Nike says, just do it,
Yeah.
The other thing, we might take a drop down here too, in our helicopter. It might drop down too far, but it's worth noting, that a career and a calling isn't the same thing.
Yeah.
And live with that tension, and also give you permission self-permission to have a calling. Your career it might be, for some people, they have to have work, but their calling is to invest in marriages.
Yeah.
So they're volunteering with their church, or they're, involved in another ministry that's working with, and their career is to provide, funds to kind of keep that going.
I love that. I heard Tim Keller, I want to say it was Carrie Newhoff. It was one of his last podcasts he did. He kind of leaned into that of like part of humanity is of being human is being contributing members to society.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something very fulfilling about just doing the work that needs to be done for society to work. And
right.
And so like he was kind of playing that tension of like your career and your calling don't necessarily have to be the same thing. And sometimes they are, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
But that don't feel that pressure of like, well, what I'm doing for my living has to fit within this.
Right.
Because
it's a lot of stress.
Yeah. You could add another circle. Like, can I get paid for it?
Right. Yeah. That's the fourth. That's the fourth one.
Can I get paid? And if not, maybe this is something you're leveraging outside of your career.
Right.
That's great. Well, Jim, I appreciate you hanging out. And my heart with this is really tied to a larger vision for Redeemer. I really want us to strengthen our city and region and beyond as a church. And I truly believe that strengthening, that blessing that I feel God has called us to isn't limited to a geographical location of Redeemer. Like, so for Redeemers, it's not about like, well, this is the neighborhood God's placed us, so that's where our impact is limited to. I think our impact is as vast as our people are as we disperse. And so spoiler alert, Nehemiah 4, there's different roles people play, activities. You got builders, you got fighters, leaders. There's a trumpet blower.
You need a trumpet blower.
And the trumpet blower rallies the people to gather. Because it's like, hey, you're scattered all over this wall. You're so far away. When we blow the trumpet, like, let's come back together and make sure we're on the same page. And I think church is like a trumpet blow. It's like we come together and make sure that we're worshiping God in song. We're knowing Him through the preaching of His word. We're remembering His love in the gospel through taking communion and thinking about His life, death, and resurrection. But then, like, once we gather, just like the people on the wall have to go back to work, and we scatter. And so I really would love our people to fill up on Sundays, but then scatter throughout our city, region, and beyond with a sense of calling. Yes. And I think that's going to be our greatest impact, not our programs that are happening in a building, but our people who are going out into the world we're in.
So as the guy that helped start the church, and hear you say that, that was our vision for the Redeemer.
Yeah.
That it wouldn't be just a programming on Sunday or just something that a bunch of Christians get together and kind of navel gaze. Not that we do that, but that you could kind of like just keep on getting fatter and fatter, but that we would see our life as on mission for God.
Yeah.
And have understand ourselves in such a way and understand our context in such a way that we would really leverage all of who we are for God's purposes in the world.
Yeah, that's something that's interesting is when did the disciples get in trouble? When they were inward focused. Who's going to be the greatest?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Like hey, can I sit at your right hand and left hand? It's so as a church, we want to fight to have an outward face posture to the world God's placed us in.
Good deal.
So, Jim, I appreciate you hanging out. No guarantees. We might get this closer to the ground with some workshops. We can
talk
on
about that. Yeah.
But right now, this is just the airplane from Sunday. The podcast is the helicopter. And if you have interest in going deeper in this, let us know and we'll try to help you take it further.
I think we got closer to it.
Yeah. Thanks
for that conversation.
Appreciate the time.